I am Heinrich the Elf, being helped out a little bit by Jim Luther, the storyteller. Yes, Heinrich the Elf. I am a shoemaker elf, and I come originally from Germany. But you're probably wondering, where do elves come from in the first place? Oh, they come from all over the world, because there is not really a place where there is a group of people where there aren't some elves of some kind or another, or fairies, or leprechauns, or whatever. The elves sort of began up in Scandinavia, up where the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Danes live. The fairies, they got their start in Ireland, along with leprechauns and others. But there are many magical creatures in the various places of the world. For example, in India, if you rub a lamp, out comes a genie. In America, back when there was no white people and there were Native Americans, they had elves too, only they called them little people. The Blackfoot Indians, they had a group that were not only little people, but coyotes. And they would change themselves from coyotes to little people and help them win battles. So there are elves or other kinds of people everywhere in the world. Some people say that we started when the world began, and they had some leftover angels up in heaven that weren't needed any longer when they created the earth. So down we came. And our job has always been to help people, especially people who are kind and generous to others. For example, the reason they call me the Shoemaker Elf is because of a story that was told, a true story, of course, by the Grimm brothers, who wrote Grimm's fairy tales, although they should have said Grimm's elf tales. You see, there was a shoemaker in Germany many years ago who was a wonderfully kind, gentle soul. And he did wonderful things for people. When anybody knocked on the door, he fed them, or he even gave them a place to sleep, and sometimes even a pair of shoes. Well, it was wonderful. But, as happens with economies, they went down, and he was having a hard time making ends meet. In fact, he was down to the point where he had enough leather to make one pair of shoes. Well, he cut them out, got them ready, and then, of course, he had little choice but to go to bed and get some rest. Well, the elf king, yes, there was an elf king in that part of the world. He sent myself and my partner to the shoemaker's shop, which we entered in the middle of the night. And we took all that leather and put it together in the form of one pair of shoes. Beautifully made, needless to say, because we made them after all. And we left. And the next morning he got up, went to his workbench to start working, only the shoes were finished. Well, he had no choice but to put them out in the window and open the door. And it wasn't long before a gentleman came, saw the shoes, bought them, and paid almost twice as much as usual, which gave him enough money to buy leather for 2 pair of shoes. And so he cut them out, and then, wondering what would happen, left them on the workbench. And that night my partner and I came in, and very shortly there were 2 pair of beautifully made shoes. Well, the gentleman who bought the first pair told some of his friends, and they came by, and they snapped up those two like nothing. And now he had leather for 4. And then it was 8. And then it was 16. We elves were beginning to get a little tired at the end of that 16th shoe, I have to tell you. But it was right about Christmas time. And now the shoemaker was doing very well. And so he and his wife began to wonder, how on earth did those shoes get made? So there was a curtain hanging in the storeroom, and they hid behind the curtain and just looked out through a little slit. And as we came in and started working on those 16 pair of shoes, they could see who it was. 2 elves. Now, in those days, we didn't have much in the way of clothing. In fact, we didn't have any. We just didn't need that kind of thing because elves can stand all kinds of weather and conditions. But the wife thought, I've got to do something about that. And so the next day they got up, and the 2 of them went to work. Now, she started to put something together in the way of clothing, but she realized she didn't have much of anything because she had been doing some decorating for Christmas. And she had some green cloth and some red cloth, and in small little bits and pieces. So she put it together, but she had to put a little green here and a little red there and a little green here and a little red there in order to make it work. But she made the clothes, and she had the shoemaker make some shoes for us elves. And he made them with pointed toes. It turned out to be a very interesting thing to do. Well, they went to bed, and that night the elves came, we came, and we thought, oh, back to work. But no, instead of work, there were things for us to put on. The jacket and the shirt and the pants and the shoes and even a pointed hat. Ah, what a wonderful thing it was. Well, when we went out and other elves saw us, they liked these things so well that they turned right around and everyone wanted the same kind of clothing. And that's why you see elves dressed pretty much like this almost everywhere you go. Why, if you go up to the North Pole, where there are elves after elves after elves working for the biggest elf of all, Santa Claus, they're all dressed pretty much the same. Well, of course, elves didn't stay in one location because over the years, Germans moved to the Americas. And so did the Irish. And so did people from all over. And so as a result, the various elves of all groups have sort of shown up here at one time or another. Oh, and it's been wonderful. Because it's kind of nice to get to meet the fairies and the leprechauns. Because, you know, the leprechauns are shoemakers too. You see, fairies love to dance. And they dance and they dance and they dance and they wear out their shoes. And so leprechauns make shoes for them. And they get paid in gold, which is how they happen to have a pot of it eventually in their lives. But you know, we elves are smarter. We love to dance too, but we take our shoes off before we start dancing. And so we don't have to be doing shoemaking. In fact, I don't make shoes anymore because there are no shoemakers anymore. All the shoes are made in factories. And if you look at the ones that you're wearing, they were made in Bangladesh, or maybe in the Philippines, or even in China, but made somewhere else. And so we shoemaker elves have to do other things. We have to find other ways to help people. For example, a couple of days ago, I'm sure that you were in the process of getting ready to go to work. And you got dressed and you started looking for your car keys. And they weren't hanging on the hook they usually belong on. And you checked the pants that you wore the day before and they weren't there either. And you started looking all over for those keys. And you looked here, you looked there, you looked here, you looked on the desk, you looked at the table. And all of a sudden, there were the keys, right on top of your desk where you had already looked 5 times before. Well, that was us. We found your keys for you. And then you had to go to work. And you got onto the freeway, drove as far as you needed, got off the freeway and started down the main road. And you pulled off and the light was red. Oh my gosh, you thought to yourself, I'm going to be late for work. But the light turned green. And every light thereafter turned green just before you got to it. And you got to work on time. In fact, as you were coming up in the elevator, right behind you came running your boss, complaining, I would have been here earlier, but every light I fetched was red. Well, you can understand. That was elves, too. Because we do good things for good people. Once there was a little boy whose name was Stevie. He was a very intelligent young man. Stevie was. He was in the 6th grade. He was wonderful in science, wonderful in math, but he did not like spelling. Oh, that was something that he didn't care for at all. The day before, the teacher had said, tomorrow we're going to have a spelling test. Well, Stevie was a good boy. He obeyed his parents. He was kind to his friends. And so it was decided to give him a little hand. And you see, an elf, if you catch him and hold on to him, he must give you a wish. And so I made myself visible so he could see me. And he grabbed me and he held me. And he said, I need my wish. And I said, well, Stevie, what would you wish for? And he said, I wish to have an A on my spelling test. Well, now, if you give a wish to an elf, you've got to be very careful about what you say, because you'll get exactly what you ask for. And so the next day, the teacher started reading the words on the list. And the first word was apple. Oh, I know that one, Stevie said to himself, and he wrote apple. The next word was application. And he thought he knew that one and wrote it out. And the next word was agriculture. Uh-oh, Stevie said to himself. And after that, it was administrators. And from then on, he was dead in the water. But he realized he had gotten his wish. He had an A on his test. In fact, every word began with the letter A. Well, he learned something. He needed to wish for a grade of A, not just an A. But he also learned something else. If he had studied in advance, he would have gotten a good grade on that test anyway. And so from then on, it was study, 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 work, 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 until he became an inventor of personal computers. You see, his name was Steve Jobs. And the computer? The first word on that spelling test, the apple. Or at least so somebody tells me about. Well, we would like to have some questions. Are there any questions from those of you who are listening? I see one. Who is your favorite elf? Oh, that's easy. And I'll bet he's yours too. And that's Santa Claus. Right? Remember in the poem, The Night Before Christmas? it was written, he was a jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. He is my favorite elf, too. Now, there's another question coming in. I see it. It says, what do elves eat? Well, let me tell you, in New York, there were a group of elves called, a group of Indians, I should say, American natives called the Iroquois Indians. And they believed, and in fact they loved to have them nearby, elves, because elves love strawberries. And they would encourage and help, and elves would plant strawberries for them, prepare the soil, and get the seeds in the ground, and they grew the most beautiful strawberries you ever want to see, which they enjoyed, and we enjoy, and still do. So elves love strawberries, among other things. Now, there's another question coming in. See if I can find out what that question is. Oh, it says, this question is, how long have you been telling stories? Well, the question really should be, how long have there been elves in existence? Because elves tell stories all the time. We love stories. Indeed, many of the stories that you read about, fairy tales, like Snow White, like Cinderella, and other stories, Pinocchio. Well, those are stories that we love too. And how long have we been around to tell those stories? Like I said earlier, from the beginning of time. So storytelling has been around a long time, and so have we. And another question that's just come in. Any relation to house elves? Oh, Harry Potter. Well, I have to tell you that elves are written by a lot of people. Shakespeare loved to write about elves. Have you ever seen Midsummer Night's Dream? Spenser, he was a wonderful writer, and most especially the one who wrote about Harry Potter. She loved elves. But the house elves in Harry Potter, they are not quite like us. They're invented elves. Because we don't walk around beating our heads against the wall every time we do anything wrong. Instead, we just do something else that's right. Can I show you an elf dance? Now, I don't know who came up with that particular question, but if you might notice the wrinkles around my eyes and my face, the answer is I don't dance anymore. I just fix the shoes of those who do when it's necessary. But I wish I could, and I would love to. But now, the other question that I'm getting a word of here is something about, yes, since in the world before, we were all separated out. The fairies lived in Ireland, and the elves lived in Europe and so on. But now everybody's gathered here to America, and the Scandinavians marry the Irish people. Do the elves get together with the fairies? To tell you the honest truth, I don't know. I've been so busy taking care of all of your problems that I've never gotten around to thinking about getting married. Except once. And I'll tell you, I met Tinkerbell. Oh, what a delight she was. But unfortunately, she flits around so much, chasing after Peter Pan, we were never able to get together. And so, never have I. And the other final question, just one. Where do elves live? Well, let me tell you where we live. In the most beautiful place in the world, where the water comes up on the sand, where the sky is always blue and the clouds are beautiful and white and clear. We live in your imagination.